What's up guys, in today's video we're going to be talking about some of the best budget battery life phones. So if battery life is something that you really care about on your phone, is top priority, then these phones should be excellent for that. I've tested most of them and they're all excellent, A plus battery life phones. Starting with the G9 Power, it's actually $223 right now on Amazon, and it's a very good phone. I really enjoyed my time with it. It's got a massive 6,000 milliamp battery with 20-watt fast charging, and again, this thing was a beast. Really cannot kill this phone in a day. So if you're somebody that likes big phones and you want a big battery life, it is a little bit heavy, so do note that. So it's got a 6.8 inch IPS display. It's a 720p plus display, 263 for the PPI. It's got a punch hole. Overall, the display is fine. It's not the best display, the best IPS display I've ever seen. But colors and everything is fine. Brightness is fine. It's just a decent display. But the highlight with it is that it's a huge phone. So if you want a really big display, then this is definitely it. It does have a little bit of bezel, but honestly for $223, it's not a huge deal. Out of the box you get Android 10, and it's pretty much a stock version of Android, which is something that I love. Motorola has their MOTO apps that they throw in there with all of the gestures and stuff you can do, customization. It's really clean. I really love it. You do have the Snapdragon 662 and Adreno 610. Overall, it's fine for doing casual gaming. Of course, you're not going to be able to like max stuff out, but gaming was fine on here. You can play games perfectly fine. If you guys want to check out my full video on that to see some footage of that. You do have micro SD support and 128 gigs of internal storage, which is really nice, along with 4 gigs of RAM on here. So this phone does have the headphone jack, and it does have NFC, and you also have a fingerprint scanner. It is rear mounted and it's awesome. I love that they put it in the power button. I think it's just the best spot to put it in. I say that all the time, but it really is. And you do have on here okay camera setup. It's not anything that's gonna blow you away. It's a 64 megapixel standard, 2 megapixel macro, 2 megapixel depth sensor. It's 1080p, 16 megapixel selfie camera, and the pictures are fine. They definitely are not better than the G8 Power, which we will talk about. I did a whole comparison, but pictures are fine, as you can see, for what it is. If you're in good lighting, you can definitely squeeze a really good shot out of this phone. It's only when you get in sort of like average to okay lighting is where you see a lot of noise and stuff, and it does not do well in low light at all. So just do note that. And video is kind of average on here too, as well, only at 1080p. So overall the phone is really good for what it is. The highlight is definitely a big display and a huge battery and a pretty decent spec sheet. Next is the POCO X3 NFC. Now this costs around $250 on Amazon right now, and again, all links will be down below. This phone also had excellent battery life, and it had a 5,160 milliamp battery, and it was awesome on battery life. I mean, standby time, you cannot kill this phone in a day at all. It was really good. I really enjoyed it, and the rest of the phone is great as well. So you do actually have an aluminum frame, plastic back on here. It feels pretty solid in the hands. IP53 splash proof as well, but I really wouldn't try to like submerge it in water. I would just treat it like it wasn't having an IP rating, because splash proof really means just out in the rain and stuff like that. But you do have on here, to me, the back of the design is kind of like the camera module setup isn't my favorite looking. It's not my favorite looking phone from the back. From the front it looks great, but the back, it just kind of looks strange to me still. But you do have a this is also a really good highlight with this phone. It's a 6.67 inch 1080p display, 395 for the PPI, but it's actually a 120 hertz display. It is an IPS display, but the display is really awesome. Everything is just super smooth and silky with this 120 hertz. It's really nice. If you're somebody that likes to game in 120 hertz, this phone is capable of that as well, and that experience is just awesome. So you have Android 10 on top of MIUI 12. Ton of customization with MIUI 12. You also have the Snapdragon 732G and Adreno 618. Again, it's a pretty good phone for gaming and stuff like that. You can do that on this phone if you want to. You do have micro SD support along with 64 gigs of internal storage and 6 gigs of RAM on here as well, and you do have NFC along also with an infrared port. So Xiaomi is like one of the only companies still putting infrared ports in. If you don't know what that is, you can basically use the phone like a remote controller, control a TV or air conditioner or something like that. It's kind of an underrated kind of feature on here. The fingerprint scanner is side mounted and it works excellent as well. Now you actually have pretty good stereo speakers on here too, very loud, very crisp, and the headphone jack is still on board with this phone. So the awesome thing about this phone is that you have excellent cameras on here, very good for this price point. Quad camera setup, a 64 megapixel standard, 13 megapixel ultra wide, a 2 megapixel macro, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. You have 4K video, 20 megapixel selfie. As you can see from the shots, good depth of field, good detail. Color science is pretty good. I like using the cameras on here. At this price point, I had nothing to complain about. The macro camera is always fun to play with as well. Just some really excellent shots on here, and the selfie camera was also pretty good too. Now my personal favorite on the list is the Moto G8 Power. I think that it hits the sweet spot of all of these phones combined, and the price is still very good on this phone. We're sitting at actually under 200 bucks right now, but it's sitting around 200 bucks. If you want it refurbished, it's like way under 200, like 150. But you do have a plastic design on here, which does not really feel cheap. It still feels pretty solid in the hand. Overall, I still like the design on here. It does have a water repellent coating as well, and this phone has a 1080p display, 6.4 inches. So if you guys notice, the G9 Power, the only G8 they have a higher resolution display, so they downgraded the G9 Power's display. But this display is awesome. It's a really nice high quality IPS display color wise, and you have the punch hole, pretty slim bezels on here as well. I really love the display on this phone, and it's $399 for the PPI, so it's pretty sharp as well. So overall, just a really excellent IPS display here. This phone does have Android 10, the same pretty much stock version. You will get Android 11 with this phone as well. You have the Snapdragon 665 and Adreno 610. Again, this is a very capable casual gaming phone. You can play Call of Duty, PUBG on here just fine. You do have micro SD support along with 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM on here. You have a physical fingerprint scanner on here as well, which works very fast. But I guess the only downside with this phone is you don't have any NFC. So if you're somebody that depends on mobile payments, you do not have that with this one. But you do have the headphone jack and some pretty nice sounding stereo speakers as well, which is really nice. So you do have a very good camera setup as well. I think if you guys check out my comparison, it's better than the G9 Power as well too. And it's a 16 megapixel standard, 8 megapixel telephoto, 8 megapixel ultra wide, and a 2 megapixel macro. You also have 4K video and a 16 megapixel selfie camera at 1080p video. And as you can see from the photos, pretty good photos from the G8 Power. Good depth of field. The detail is awesome. It handles white balance pretty good, and I think it does a better job with, I guess, sort of medium to low light than the G9 Power as well. That's why I like it just a little bit more than that phone. But you do have very good respectable battery life on here, big 5,000 milliamp battery. So this is another phone. All these phones on this list really could not kill in a day at all. So this is still a very awesome and big battery phone still. Next is the Samsung Galaxy A12. This is an excellent phone for battery life as well, with a pretty hefty 5,000 milliamp battery too, and it's sitting at around 200 bucks as well. So the rest of the phone is pretty solid. If you're a Samsung fan, I think you really like this phone. You also have a plastic design, but I actually like the design on here. They went with like a kind of matte back on here, and it doesn't pick up fingerprints or anything, which is something that I really like. It's got a really cool looking camera module set up, so I actually really like the design of this phone. It does not feel cheap at all. So you do have on here a PLS IPS display. It's a 6.5 inch display. It's only 720p plus 264 for the PPI. So the display on here is fine. I would have liked to seen 1080p on here. but it looks okay. So if you don't mind 720p display, then it'll look fine. Now you also have Android 10 with One UI, and you have the Helio P35 processor and Power VR. So this is a phone that's not really going to be a gaming phone at all. It's really meant for like casual gaming, like Subway Surfer, just games like that. I really wouldn't be trying to like go hard on Call of Duty or PUBG because it just doesn't have the power to handle it. So I'm kind of like curious on why Samsung went with such a weak processor here, but this is not a gaming phone at all. So you do have micro SD support, 32 gigs of internal storage and 3 gigs of RAM, again, which is a little low, but you do have micro SD support. That's not a huge deal. Performance wise, the phone was fine. I didn't have any issues using the applications, and just your basic use was fine here. You do have a decent sounding speaker. Also, the headphone jack is still here, and you do have NFC for your mobile payments as well. It is market dependent though, so do note that. You do have a fingerprint scanner side mounted as well, and the cameras on the A12 are actually pretty decent. Not anything that's gonna be mind-blowing, it's just decent. So if you're in good lighting, you can get a good shot, but again, like all of these phones, you take them out of any kind of bright lighting, then everything becomes soft, and you're not gonna get a really great photo. But it's a 48 megapixel standard, 5 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel macro, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. Shoots in 1080p. Selfie camera 8 megapixel, 1080p. Like I said, it's fine. It's not anything that's gonna blow you away here, but overall the phone is pretty solid for a cheap price. I think it's a solid deal as well, and again, great battery life too. Next is the POCO M3. So this is also a battery life beast, and this is a phone we're gonna have on the channel real soon, and I really like this phone. It sits at 200 bucks. It's got a massive 6,000 milliamp battery on here, completely crazy size. And you also have on here a pretty cool design, I think, from Xiaomi. I think the camera module looks really cool. I just think that it does not look like a cheap phone to me. I think it looks really cool to me. And you also have pretty slim bezels on the front, little water drop notch on here. It's a 6.5 inch display. It's 1080p, 395 for the PPI. Overall, it looks really solid. You also have Android 10 with MIUI 12, a Snapdragon 662 and Adreno 610, which should be capable of playing, Call of Duty, PUBG. Of course, again, you won't be able to max it out, but you'll be able to play those games just fine. You also have micro SD support, 64 gigs of internal storage, and 4 gigs of RAM as well. You also have actually dual speakers on this phone, which is crazy, along with a headphone jack. This phone does not have NFC, so no mobile payments with this guy. The fingerprint scanner is side mounted, which is awesome, and from what I've seen, you have a decent cameras on here. Again, it's the same story here. If you're in good lighting, you get a good shot, but you have a 48 megapixel standard, a 2 megapixel macro, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. It only shoots in 1080p though, and an 8 megapixel selfie that shoots in 1080p. So overall, this is a very solid phone, especially if you're a Xiaomi fan. So what do you guys think? Be sure to let me know, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.